The F-33 Raptor screamed across Nellis Air Force Base at 500 feet, its twin engines creating a sonic signature that rattled windows for miles. In the cockpit, 28-year-old Captain Jessica "Ghost" Morrison executed a knife-edge pass that shouldn't have been possible, the kind of maneuver that separated legends from wannabes. But just 18 months earlier, Colonel Marcus Hammer Davidson had looked her dead in the eye and said she'd never amount to more than a weekend warrior playing dress-up in Daddy's old uniform. "Women like you," he'd snared, his voice dripping with contempt. "Think showing up with your participation trophy degree and your emotional baggage makes you pilot material? This isn't some diversity quota program. Sweetheart, real pilots earn their wings with blood, sweat, and balls, something you'll never have." The room had erupted in laughter from the male cadets, their voices echoing off the hangar walls like a pack of hyenas sensing weakness. They'd called her Barbie behind her back, whispered about how she probably slept her way into the program, and made jokes about her monthly cycles affecting her G-force tolerance. One particularly cruel cadet had even taped a picture of a crashed F-16 to her locker, with PMS Pilot scrawled across it in permanent marker. But what none of them knew, what they couldn't have imagined in their wildest nightmares, was that Jessica Morrison possessed something that would make their blood run cold. She was the granddaughter of Chuck Morrison, the legendary test pilot who'd helped design the F-33's flight control systems, and she'd been flying since she was 12 years old. More importantly, she had access to classified information that would expose the systematic corruption, nepotism, and incompetence that had been plaguing the flight training program for over a decade. Today, as her Raptor carved impossible arcs through the Nevada sky, she wasn't just proving them wrong, she was about to detonate their entire world. The story begins 6 years earlier at Randolph Air Force Base in Texas, where Jessica Morrison first stepped onto the tarmac, wearing her pressed flight suit and carrying dreams that had been forged in the crucible of a military family legacy. Her grandfather Chuck had been a legend in the test pilot community, pushing experimental aircraft to their limits and helping develop the systems that would eventually become the backbone of America's air superiority. Her father, Colonel James Morrison, had flown combat missions in Iraq and Afghanistan before a training accident grounded him permanently. Growing up, Jessica had spent countless hours in her grandfather's workshop, learning about aerodynamics, engine mechanics, and the delicate dance between pilot and machine that separated the good from the great. She'd soloed in a Cessna at 16, earned her commercial license at 19, and graduated from the Air Force Academy with a degree in aeronautical engineering and a commission as a second lieutenant. Her test scores were in the top 5%, her physical fitness evaluations were exemplary, and her psychological profiles showed the kind of mental toughness that made elite pilots. But none of that mattered to Colonel Marcus Davidson, the man who ran the advanced flight training program like his personal kingdom. Davidson was old-school military, a throwback to an era when the cockpit was exclusively male territory, and any woman who dared enter was viewed as either a novelty act or a threat to the natural order. At 53, he commanded respect through intimidation and maintained his position through a network of favors, connections, and carefully buried scandals. His own flying days were long behind him. A series of incidents involving alcohol and poor judgment had relegated him to training duty, but he wielded power over young pilots' careers, like a medieval lord deciding who lived or died. The moment Jessica walked into his briefing room for orientation, his cold gray eyes assessed her with the clinical precision of a predator evaluating prey. The systematic harassment began immediately and escalated with military precision. During her first week, Jessica discovered that her flight suit had been doused with hydraulic fluid, making it unwearable and forcing her to miss a critical training session. Her flight helmet disappeared twice, only to be found in the women's bathroom with crude drawings and profanity scrawled on the interior. The other cadets, taking their cues from Davidson's obvious disdain, treated her like a contaminated specimen that might infect them with weakness or political correctness. They excluded her from study groups, spread rumors about her personal life, and created a hostile environment that would have broken a lesser person. The worst came during a particularly brutal training exercise when Davidson assigned her to fly with Marcus Tank Williams, a cadet whose father was a 3-star general and whose entitled attitude made him particularly vicious toward anyone he perceived as inferior. Williams had made it clear from day one that he considered Jessica's presence an insult to every real pilot who'd ever earned wings through merit rather than affirmative action. During their joint training flight, Williams deliberately sabotaged her radio communications, leaving her unable to coordinate with ground control during a complex landing sequence. When she managed to land safely despite the equipment failure, Williams filed a report claiming she'd panicked under pressure and compromised flight safety. Davidson accepted the report without investigation, adding a formal reprimand to Jessica's file and scheduling her for additional remedial training. The message was clear: they would manufacture reasons to fail her if they couldn't find real ones. What they didn't realize was that Jessica had been documenting everything, every instance of harassment, every equipment failure, every suspicious circumstance that suggested deliberate sabotage. Her grandfather had taught her that the best pilots were also the most meticulous record keepers, and she applied that lesson to her persecution with scientific precision. The breaking point came during Jessica's final evaluation flight, a comprehensive test that would determine whether she advanced to the next phase of training or washed out of the program entirely. She'd prepared for months, studying every manual, memorizing every procedure, and practicing in the simulator until she could fly complex missions in her sleep. The evaluation would take place in an F-16, the Air Force's premier fighter trainer, and would test everything from basic flight skills to advanced combat maneuvers. Jessica felt confident as she suited up, knowing that her scores had been consistently high despite the obstacles placed in her path. But when she climbed into the cockpit, she immediately noticed something wrong with the aircraft's heads-up display, the crucial system that projected flight information directly onto the pilot's visor. The display was flickering intermittently, creating dangerous gaps in critical information during high-speed maneuver. She reported the malfunction to ground control, but Davidson's voice crackled through her headset with dismissive irritation. "Morrison, the aircraft has been thoroughly inspected and cleared for flight. Any problems you're experiencing are pilot error, not equipment failure. Complete your evaluation or wash out your choice." She had seconds to decide: abort the flight and face accusations of cowardice, or proceed with potentially dangerous equipment and risk a catastrophic failure. Jessica chose to fly, relying on her instrument training and raw skill to compensate for the malfunctioning display. For 45 minutes, she executed every required maneuver while dealing with intermittent loss of crucial flight data. Her landing was textbook perfect, and she felt a surge of relief as the wheels touched down on the runway. But when she climbed out of the cockpit, Davidson was waiting with a satisfied smirk and a clipboard full of failure notices. "Cadet Morrison," he announced loud enough for other trainees to hear, "your performance today was substandard and dangerous. You failed to properly utilize your heads-up display, missed several altitude markers, and demonstrated insufficient situational awareness for advanced fighter operations. You are hereby dismissed from the program effective immediately." The dismissal should have been the end of Jessica's military aviation career, but it was actually the beginning of something far more dangerous for the men who thought they'd destroyed her. Unknown to Davidson and his cronies, Jessica's grandfather, Chuck Morrison, had spent his final years investigating irregularities in military flight training programs across the country. Before his death 2 years earlier, he'd compiled a dossier of evidence suggesting widespread corruption, nepotism, and systematic discrimination that went far beyond individual prejudice. The file contained financial records showing how training contracts were awarded to companies owned by relatives of senior officers, maintenance reports that had been falsified to cover up dangerous cost-cutting measures, and testimony from dozens of pilots who'd been forced out of programs for political rather than performance reasons. Chuck had given the file to Jessica with specific instructions: use it only if the system failed her completely, and only if she was prepared for the consequences. 3 days after her dismissal, sitting in her cramped apartment off base and staring at rejection letters from commercial airlines who'd been advised about her performance issues, Jessica finally opened her grandfather's file. What she found made her blood run cold and her resolve harden like steel. Davidson wasn't just a bigoted training officer, he was part of a network that had been systematically excluding qualified pilots while protecting the incompetent sons and nephews of military leadership. The evidence was overwhelming, detailed, and incriminating enough to end careers and trigger congressional investigations. But Jessica didn't want to destroy careers. She wanted to prove that she belonged in the cockpit of America's most advanced fighter aircraft. She wanted to demonstrate her skills so decisively that even Davidson's network of corruption couldn't deny her competence. And thanks to her grandfather's connections and her own determination, she knew exactly how to do it. The plan would require patience, precision, and access to resources that officially didn't exist. But Jessica Morrison had never backed down from a challenge, and she wasn't about to start now. 6 months after her dismissal from the official program, Jessica found herself at a classified facility in the Nevada desert where experimental aircraft were tested beyond the public eye. Her grandfather's final gift hadn't just been a file of incriminating evidence, it had been a letter of introduction to Colonel Sarah Viper Chen, a legendary test pilot who'd been quietly building a shadow program for pilots who'd been rejected by the traditional system for political rather than performance reasons. Chen had her own history with Davidson's network. She'd been passed over for promotion multiple times, despite an exemplary record because she'd refused to play politics or ignore the incompetence she witnessed. Now, operating with unofficial Pentagon support and funding from defense contractors who were tired of receiving poorly trained pilots, Chen ran a program that identified genuine talent regardless of gender, background, or political connections. The facility looked like a civilian aerospace company from the outside, but behind its unremarkable facades lay some of the most advanced flight simulators and training aircraft in the world. Jessica's first day was unlike anything she'd experienced in traditional military training. Instead of harassment and hazing, she found herself among a group of pilots who'd all been discarded by the system for various reasons, some for refusing to cover up safety violations, others for reporting sexual harassment, and a few who'd simply been too skilled to fit comfortably within the rigid hierarchy of military aviation. Chen's evaluation process was brutal but fair, pushing each pilot to their absolute limits while providing the support and resources necessary for success. Jessica thrived in the environment, finally able to demonstrate her abilities without sabotage or political interference. Within 3 months, she was flying advanced trainers with performance metrics that exceeded anything she'd achieved in the official program. Her technical knowledge, combined with her natural flying ability and years of suppressed determination, made her a standout, even among the exceptional pilots Chen had assembled. But the real test came when Chen revealed the program's ultimate goal, proving that her rejected pilots could outperform the graduates of traditional programs in actual combat scenarios. The plan was ambitious, and Danger-Rauscher pilots would eventually be given opportunities to demonstrate their skills in ways that would be impossible to dismiss or cover up. The opportunity Jessica had been training for arrived in the form of a crisis that threatened to expose the corruption she'd uncovered, while simultaneously giving her the platform she needed to prove her worth. A routine training exercise at Nellis Air Force Base had gone catastrophically wrong when 2 F-16s collided during a formation flight, killing both pilots and raising serious questions about the competency of recent graduates from Davidson's program. The incident couldn't be covered up too. Many civilians had witnessed the crash, and the media was asking uncomfortable questions about pilot training standards. Even worse for Davidson, the preliminary investigation suggested that both pilots had made basic errors that should have been caught and corrected during their training. The Air Force needed a demonstration of excellence to restore public confidence, and they needed it quickly. That's when Chen made her move, proposing a demonstration flight that would showcase the abilities of her alternative training program. The Pentagon, desperate to deflect criticism and prove that American pilot training was still the world's best, agreed to a highly publicized event at Nellis Air Force Base. The demonstration would feature the F-33 Raptor, America's most advanced fighter aircraft, flown by pilots from both traditional and alternative training programs. The subtext was clear. Chen's rejects would have to prove themselves against the cream of Davidson's graduates in front of military leadership, media representatives, and foreign observers. For Jessica, it was the opportunity she'd been preparing for her entire life, a chance to fly the most sophisticated aircraft ever built and demonstrate that skill mattered more than politics. But Davidson and his network weren't about to let their system be challenged without a fight. When the pilot assignments were announced, Jessica discovered that she'd been paired against Marcus "Tank" Williams, the same cadet who'd sabotaged her training flight months earlier. Williams had graduated with honors from Davidson's program and was now being groomed for a position with the Thunderbirds demonstration team. The matchup was deliberate. Davidson wanted to ensure that Jessica's inevitable failure would be as public and humiliating as possible. What Davidson didn't know was that Jessica had spent the past 6 months not just training in advanced aircraft, but also studying the specific weaknesses and limitations of pilots who'd graduated from his program. The week leading up to the demonstration was a masterclass in psychological warfare, with Davidson and his allies doing everything possible to undermine Jessica's confidence while building up Williams as the inevitable victor. Military blogs mysteriously published articles questioning whether experimental training programs could produce pilots capable of handling frontline aircraft. Anonymous sources suggested that Chen's program was a publicity stunt that would end in disaster when diversity hires tried to compete with real pilots. Williams himself gave interviews expressing confidence that he would show everyone the difference between legitimate training and social engineering. The pressure was enormous, but Jessica had learned to channel adversity into fuel for her determination. She spent hours in the simulator perfecting maneuvers that pushed the F-33 to its performance limits, studying the aircraft's classified capabilities, and developing flight profiles that would showcase both her skills and the fighter's unmatched abilities. Chen provided tactical advice and emotional support, but made it clear that Jessica would succeed or fail based on her own abilities. The night before the demonstration, Jessica received an unexpected visitor, her father, Colonel James Morrison, who'd flown from Colorado to witness his daughter's moment of truth. Their relationship had been complicated since her dismissal from the program. He'd supported her decision to continue pursuing aviation, but worried that she was damaging her career by challenging the established system. Now, seeing the confidence and determination in her eyes, he understood that this wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about demonstrating that excellence couldn't be suppressed by prejudice or politics. "Your grandfather would be proud," he told her as they stood together on the flight line, looking at the F-33 that would either vindicate her sacrifices or end her aviation dreams forever. He always said that the best pilots weren't the ones who followed orders blindly, but the ones who knew when to break the rules to get the job done. As dawn broke over the Nevada desert, Jessica Morrison prepared to either soar into legend or crash into ignominy, carrying with her the hopes of every pilot who'd ever been told they didn't belong in the cockpit. The morning of the demonstration dawned clear and cold over Nellis Air Force Base, with visibility unlimited and winds, calm, perfect conditions for what would either be Jessica's greatest triumph or most public humiliation. She arrived at the flight line 3 hours before her scheduled takeoff, going through her pre-flight routine with the methodical precision her grandfather had drilled into her years ago. The F-33 Raptor waiting for her was a masterpiece of engineering, its angular stealth design and twin engines representing the pinnacle of American air superiority technology. At $150 million per aircraft, it was the most expensive fighter jet ever built, and only the most elite pilots were trusted to fly it. The assembled crowd reflected the high stakes of the demonstration. Pentagon officials, defense contractors, foreign military observers, and media representatives from around the world had gathered to witness what was being billed as a showcase of American pilot training excellence. But Jessica knew the real stakes were personal. Her performance would determine not just her own future, but the credibility of Chen's alternative training program and the careers of every pilot who'd been rejected by the traditional system. As she suited up in the specialized gear required for F-33 operations, she could hear the murmur of voices from the observation area, many of whom had come expecting to see her fail spectacularly. Davidson himself was prominent among the VIPs, his confident demeanor suggesting a man who was certain the day would end with his worldview vindicated. Williams was scheduled to fly first, giving him the advantage of setting the performance standard while flying in optimal conditions. Jessica would follow, forced to match or exceed his demonstration while dealing with whatever challenges emerged. The pressure was enormous. But as Jessica strapped herself into the F-33's cockpit and began the startup sequence, she felt the familiar calm that came with being exactly where she belonged. The aircraft systems came online with electronic precision, displays lighting up with information that would overwhelm a lesser pilot, but felt like a familiar language to someone who'd been studying advanced avionics since childhood. Williams's flight was technically proficient but uninspired. A by-the-book demonstration that showcased the F-33's capabilities without pushing any boundaries or revealing the kind of innovation that separated great pilots from competent ones. He executed standard maneuvers with mechanical precision, climbing to assigned altitudes and maintaining prescribed speeds with the rigid adherence to protocol that Davidson's program emphasized above all else. The crowd applauded politely, and military officials nodded approvingly at the textbook display of aerial competence. But Jessica, monitoring Williams's performance from the ground, recognized the limitations in his approach. He was flying the aircraft within safe parameters, without exploring the edges of its performance envelope, or demonstrating the kind of creative problem-solving that real combat situations demanded. When Williams landed and climbed out of his cockpit to congratulations from Davidson and other program supporters, Jessica knew she would need to do more than match his performances. She would need to redefine what was possible in an F-33. Her takeoff was smooth and powerful, the Raptor's twin engines propelling her into the Nevada sky with authority that never failed to thrill her. But instead of following the prescribed demonstration profile, Jessica began with a series of maneuvers that pushed the aircraft's published performance limits while remaining within safety parameters she'd calculated through months of study and simulation. She executed a knife-edge pass at 500 feet that had the crowd gasping in amazement, followed by a vertical climb that showcased the F-33's incredible thrust-to-weight ratio. But the real demonstration began when she started combining maneuvers in ways that revealed not just her flying skills, but her deep understanding of the aircraft's capabilities and limitations. She performed a tactical sequence that simulated real combat scenarios, demonstrating how the F-33's stealth characteristics and advanced avionics could be used to engage multiple targets while remaining undetected. The crowd fell silent as they witnessed flying that transcended mere technical competence and entered the realm of artistry. Even the most experienced military observers recognized that they were seeing something extraordinary: a pilot who didn't just fly the aircraft, but partnered with it to achieve performance that seemed to violate the laws of physics. Jessica's final maneuver was a tribute to her grandfather's legacy and a statement about her own place in aviation history. she performed a modified version of the Morrison roll, a complex aerobatic sequence that Chuck Morrison had developed during his test pilot days and that few pilots had ever successfully completed. The silence that followed Jessica's landing was broken by applause that started slowly and built to a thunderous ovation as military officials, media representatives, and even rival pilots recognized that they had witnessed something unprecedented. She taxied to the flight line with her helmet off, her hair flowing in the wind, and her face showing the quiet satisfaction of someone who had just proved every doubter wrong in the most definitive way possible. Davidson's face had gone ashen, as he realized that his carefully constructed narrative about female pilots being inherently inferior had just been demolished in front of the world's military aviation community. Williams, standing beside his own aircraft, looked like a man who had just discovered that everything he believed about his own superiority was built on a foundation of sand. The post-flight debriefing was a study in political damage control, as military officials scrambled to process the implications of what they had witnessed. Jessica's performance metrics were extraordinary. She had exceeded the F-33's published performance specifications while maintaining perfect safety margins and demonstrating tactical innovations that would be studied by military strategists for years to come. More importantly, her flight had been broadcast live to military installations worldwide, making it impossible for Davidson's network to suppress or minimize her achievement. The technical data from her aircraft's systems would become part of the official record, providing irrefutable evidence of her capabilities that no amount of political maneuvering could dispute. Chen's alternative training program was immediately flooded with applications from pilots who had been rejected by traditional programs. While defense contractors began requesting Jessica specifically for test pilot assignments, the demonstration had accomplished everything Jessica had hoped for, and Morate had vindicated her grandfather's faith in her abilities, proved that excellence couldn't be suppressed by prejudice, and opened doors for countless other pilots who had been excluded from opportunities they deserved. But perhaps most satisfying was the moment when Davidson approached her after the debriefing, his arrogance replaced by grudging acknowledgement that he had been wrong about her capabilities. "That was exceptional flying, Captain Morrison," he said, the formal title carrying weight he had never accorded her before. Jessica's response was gracious but firm. "Thank you, Colonel. I hope this helps you evaluate future candidates based on their abilities rather than your assumptions." The aftermath of Jessica's demonstration flight rippled through the military aviation community like a shock wave, forcing long overdue conversations about pilot selection, training standards, and the systematic exclusion of qualified candidates based on prejudice rather than performance. Within weeks, congressional hearings were announced to investigate the irregularities Jessica's grandfather had documented, with Chen and Jessica herself called to testify about their experiences with discrimination and corruption in military aviation programs. Davidson's network began to crumble as investigators uncovered evidence of the favoritism, financial improprieties, and systematic harassment that had characterized their operations for years. Several senior officers were forced into early retirement, while others faced disciplinary actions that effectively ended their careers. The F-33 demonstration became a catalyst for broader reforms that extended far beyond military aviation, inspiring changes in how institutions evaluated and developed talent across multiple fields. Jessica herself was promoted to major and assigned to a prestigious test pilot program where her skills could be fully utilized, while Chen's alternative training program received official recognition and funding from the Pentagon. The two women became advocates for systemic change, working to ensure that future generations of pilots would be evaluated based on their abilities rather than their demographics or political connections. Williams, to his credit, sought out Jessica privately to apologize for his behavior during their training and to acknowledge that her success had taught him important lessons about his own assumptions and privileges. Their reconciliation became a model for how individuals could grow beyond their prejudices when confronted with undeniable evidence of their errors. Most importantly, Jessica's story became an inspiration for countless young women who had dreamed of military aviation careers but had been discouraged by the barriers they perceived. Her grandfather's workshop became a shrine to persistence and excellence, while her F-33 demonstration was studied in leadership courses as an example of how individual courage could catalyze institutional change. The flight that had begun as a personal quest for vindication had evolved into a legacy that would benefit generations of pilots who followed in her contrails. As Jessica looked back on her journey from dismissed cadet to test pilot legend, she understood that her grandfather's greatest gift hadn't been the evidence he'd compiled or the connections he'd provided. It had been the lesson that true excellence couldn't be suppressed by those who feared it, and that sometimes the most important battles were won not through conflict, but through the undeniable demonstration of competence, courage, and character. The changes that followed Jessica's demonstration flight weren't limited to military aviation. They cascaded through defense contractors, aerospace companies, and civilian flight training programs with the force of an avalanche. Within 6 months, 3 major defense contractors had restructured their pilot recruitment programs after internal investigations revealed patterns of discrimination similar to what Jessica had exposed. Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and Northrop Grumman all implemented new evaluation protocols that emphasized blind testing and performance metrics over personal connections and traditional pedigree. The ripple effects extended to commercial aviation, where several major airlines quietly reviewed their hiring practices and discovered their own troubling patterns of bias. Jessica found herself in the unexpected position of being a catalyst for industry-wide reform, receiving speaking invitations from aviation conferences, corporate leadership seminars, and military academies around the world. But with her newfound prominence came new challenges that tested her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Not everyone was pleased with the changes her success had triggered, and some of the resistance came from unexpected quarters. The first major test of Jessica's post-demonstration career came when she was assigned to lead a classified project developing next-generation fighter tactics for the F-33 fleet. The project, code-named Raptor Evolution, required her to work with a team of senior pilots, many of whom had been educated in the same system that had initially rejected her. Her team included Major Rick Sledgehammer Thompson, a 15-year veteran who had been passed over for promotion multiple times due to disciplinary issues, but whose combat experience made him invaluable for tactical development. Thompson had initially been skeptical of Jessica's appointment, viewing her as a poster child whose media attention overshadowed more experienced pilots. Their first meeting was tense, with Thompson making it clear that he expected competence, not celebrity, from his project leader. "I don't care what you did in that demonstration," he told her bluntly. "Out here, we deal with real threats against real enemies, not airshow tricks for politicians and reporters. You better know what you're talking about, or people are going to die because of your inexperience." Jessica's response was measured but firm. She had Thompson review her complete service record, including classified missions she'd flown since her promotion, and challenged him to evaluate her tactical innovations on their merits rather than his preconceptions. The breakthrough came during a complex simulation exercise where Jessica's unconventional approach to multi-threat engagement resulted in successful mission completion when traditional tactics had failed. Thompson's grudging respect eventually evolved into genuine collaboration as he recognized that Jessica's combination of technical expertise and innovative thinking brought capabilities the team had been lacking. The success of the Raptor Evolution project led to Jessica's selection for an even more sensitive assignment, participating in a joint operation with the Navy's elite Top Gun program to develop integrated air-to-air combat tactics. The assignment placed her in direct contact with some of the most competitive and traditional pilots in military aviation, including several who resented the attention her story had received and were eager to prove that her success had been overblown. Commander Jake Maverick Sullivan, a Top Gun instructor with a reputation for aggressive flying and alpha male posturing, made no secret of his belief that Jessica's presence was part of a political agenda rather than military necessity. During their first joint training exercise, Sullivan attempted to intimidate Jessica by pushing engagement parameters beyond safe limits, forcing her to make split-second decisions that could have resulted in dangerous situations. Instead of backing down or reporting Sullivan's behavior, Jessica matched his aggression with precision flying that demonstrated she could operate at the highest levels of aerial combat while maintaining perfect safety margins. The turning point came during a simulated dogfight where Jessica used advanced F-33 capabilities to defeat Sullivan's F-A-18 in a manner that showcased tactical innovation rather than mere technical superiority. Her post-exercise briefing analyzed Sullivan's flying strengths while identifying specific areas where Navy tactics could be improved through integration with Air Force methodologies. Sullivan's initial hostility transformed into professional respect as he realized that Jessica's approach could make him and his students better pilots. Their collaboration resulted in tactical developments that revolutionized joint service air combat training and led to Jessica's assignment as a permanent liaison between Air Force and Navy aviation programs. However, Jessica's rising profile also attracted unwanted attention from those who opposed the changes her success had catalyzed. She began receiving anonymous threats through various channel emails, warning her to stay in her lane, social media messages questioning her qualifications and suggesting her achievements were products of political correctness rather than merit, and even physical mail containing crude drawings and disturbing content. The harassment escalated when military blogs and online forums began publishing conspiracy theories, claiming that Jessica's demonstration flight had been staged or that her aircraft had been specially modified to enhance her performance. These attacks were orchestrated by a network of former military personnel and defense industry figures who felt threatened by the reforms her success had triggered. The most serious incident occurred when someone accessed her personnel files and leaked selectively edited information designed to make her appear unqualified or unstable. The leak included out-of-context excerpts from psychological evaluations, incomplete training records, and fabricated quotes attributed to unnamed colleagues questioning her competence. The story was picked up by partisan media outlets and spread across social media platforms, creating a firestorm of controversy that threatened to undermine everything Jessica had accomplished. For several weeks, she found herself defending not just her qualifications, but her right to exist in military aviation spaces. The stress was enormous, affecting her sleep, her performance, and her relationships with colleagues who weren't sure whether supporting her publicly would damage their own careers. The resolution came through an unexpected alliance with investigative journalist Sarah Chennault. Relation to Colonel Chen, who had been following the story of systemic discrimination in military aviation and recognized the harassment campaign for what it was. Chen's investigation uncovered the network behind the attacks, revealing financial connections between the perpetrators and defense contractors who had lost lucrative training contracts following the reforms. Jessica's story had triggered. The journalist's exposé detailed how the harassment campaign was funded and coordinated, including evidence that some of the threatening messages had been sent using government equipment by current military personnel, who were supposed to be implementing the very reforms they were secretly undermining. The revelation sparked a new round of investigations and resulted in criminal charges against several individuals who had participated in the campaign. More importantly, it demonstrated the lengths to which entrenched interests would go to maintain systems that served their purposes rather than military effectiveness. Jessica's vindication was complete and public, but the experience taught her valuable lessons about the price of challenging institutional power and the importance of building strong networks of allies who shared her commitment to excellence over politics. The harassment campaign's exposure actually strengthened Jessica's position within the military aviation community and led to her selection for the most prestigious assignment of her career, commanding the newly created Advanced Tactical Development Squadron, a unit specifically designed to push the boundaries of fighter aircraft capabilities and develop tactics for future conflicts. The squadron brought together the most innovative pilots from all service branches, creating an environment where unconventional thinking was not just tolerated but required. Jessica's team included pilots who had been similarly marginalized by traditional programs, but whose unique perspectives and abilities made them ideal for the kind of creative problem-solving that next-generation warfare demanded. Among her pilots was Captain Maria Santos, a former Navy pilot who had been forced out of her original squadron after reporting sexual harassment by senior officers, and Captain David Kim, an Air Force pilot whose innovative tactical ideas had been dismissed as too radical by conventional commanders. Together, they formed a unit that represented the future of military aviation, diverse, highly skilled, and unencumbered by the prejudices and limitations that had held back previous generations of pilots. The squadron's first major test came during a joint exercise with international allies, where Jessica's team was tasked with developing counter-tactics against advanced surface-to-air missile systems that represented emerging threats to American air superiority. The exercise pitted her squadron against some of the most sophisticated defensive systems available, requiring them to devise new approaches to penetrating enemy airspace while minimizing losses. Traditional tactics called for overwhelming force and accepting casualties as an inevitable cost of mission success. But Jessica's team developed innovative approaches that combined stealth, electronic warfare, and psychological operations to achieve objectives with minimal risk. Their success exceeded all expectations and resulted in fundamental changes to how the military approached air combat planning. The international observers were so impressed with the squadron's performance that several allied nations requested joint training programs to learn Jessica's methodologies. The exercise also attracted attention from the highest levels of Pentagon leadership, including the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, who personally commended Jessica's innovative approach and authorized expansion of her squadron's mission scope. As Jessica's reputation spread throughout the international military aviation community, she began receiving invitations to participate in exercises and training programs with allied nations. Her first international assignment took her to the Royal Air Force Base at RAF Lakenheath in England, where she worked with British Typhoon pilots to develop joint tactics for NATO operations. The cultural differences initially created challenges. British military tradition emphasized different values and approaches than American aviation culture. But Jessica's ability to adapt her leadership style while maintaining her core principles allowed her to build effective working relationships across national boundaries. The British pilots were initially skeptical of American methods and particularly suspicious of what they perceived as political correctness influencing military decisions. However, Jessica's demonstrated competence and her squadron's track record of success quickly overcame their reservations. Squadron leader James Wright, a veteran RAF pilot with extensive combat experience, became one of Jessica's strongest advocates after witnessing her tactical innovations firsthand. "I don't care about your politics or your gender," he told her after a particularly successful joint exercise. "I care about results, and your methods get results that save lives and complete missions. That's all that matters in this business." The collaboration resulted in NATO adopting new standardized tactics that incorporated Jessica's innovations, making her methodologies part of the alliance's official doctrine. The international success led to even more ambitious assignments, including a classified project working with Israeli Air Force pilots to develop tactics against advanced missile defense systems. The Israeli military's reputation for innovation and their experience with real-world threats provided Jessica with new challenges and learning opportunities that further refined her approach to tactical development. Working with pilots who had extensive combat experience in contested airspace taught her valuable lessons about the difference between theoretical innovations and practical applications under life-or-death pressure. Colonel Avi Goldstein, a veteran of multiple conflicts and one of Israel's most respected pilots, initially questioned whether Jessica's methods would work against opponents who were actively trying to kill pilots rather than participating in training exercises. His skepticism disappeared during a series of realistic simulations that demonstrated Jessica's tactics could indeed provide significant advantages, even against the most sophisticated threats. "Your grandfather would be proud," he told her after witnessing her team's performance. These are the kind of innovations that change the nature of warfare itself. The collaboration resulted in technological developments that enhanced the capabilities of both American and Israeli fighter aircraft, while the tactical innovations were quietly adopted by air forces around the world. Jessica's growing influence extended beyond tactical development into broader questions of military leadership and organizational culture. She was invited to lecture at war colleges, participate in Pentagon strategy sessions, and contribute to policy discussions about the future of military aviation. Her insights about talent development, team building, and innovation management proved valuable across multiple domains, leading to consulting assignments with civilian aerospace companies and technology firms. The transition from operational pilot to strategic leader wasn't always comfortable. Jessica missed the pure challenge of flying high-performance aircraft and sometimes felt constrained by the administrative responsibilities that came with senior positions. But she recognized that her greatest impact would come through systemic changes that opened opportunities for future generations of pilots and ensured that military aviation continued to attract and develop the best talent regardless of background or demographics. Her grandfather's legacy lived on through the reforms she championed and the careers she helped launch, while her own story continued to inspire young people who had previously seen military aviation as closed to them. The ultimate validation of Jessica's impact came 5 years after her demonstration flight, when she was promoted to colonel and assigned to lead the Air Force's premier test pilot school, the same institution that had produced legends like Chuck Yeager and her own grandfather. Her appointment represented not just personal achievement, but symbolic recognition that military aviation had fundamentally changed from the insular, homogeneous culture that had once rejected her. Standing before her first class of test pilot, candidates, a diverse group that included more women and minorities than any previous class, Jessica reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The students looked to her not as a diversity hire or political statement, but as a proven leader whose innovations had changed how military aviation operated. Her opening lecture emphasized the principles her grandfather had taught her: that excellence was the only standard that mattered, that innovation required challenging conventional wisdom, and that the best pilots were those who combined technical mastery with the courage to push beyond established limits. "Your job," she told her students, "is not to preserve the status quo or maintain traditions for their own sake. Your job is to make American military aviation so advanced, so capable, and so innovative that our enemies can't imagine defeating us. Everything else, politics, prejudice, personal comfort, is secondary to that mission." As she looked out at the eager faces before her, Jessica Morrison knew that her grandfather's dreams had not only been fulfilled but exceeded, and that the sky would always belong to those bold enough and skilled enough to claim it.